Hi everyone, John Heath here again for Milton Rose Learning with another Let's Learn lesson on Macbeth characters. So this one is all about kind of evil witches and treasonous lords today. So we're going to start by looking at some of the key characters and giving you a brief kind of who's who. Then we will start to dissect the characters, looking at audience responses. So basically how a modern audience responds to the characters and a Jacobean audience responds at the time, because they respond in very different ways. And then we will take you on a key character journey. So we'll look at Macbeth's characterization specifically and how he kind of evolves throughout the play in quite a negative way, actually. Okay then, so first off, let's have a look at the who's who. So firstly then, obviously, we have Macbeth. So Macbeth is very much a brave soldier whose ambition spirals into tyranny and guilt after committing regicide against King Duncan. So he's an extremely brave soldier, but he's very ambitious. That's his tragic flaw that causes his hamartia, or tragic downfall, really. And he basically, kills the king, takes the throne, as we know, but all the tragedy spirals from that because he has basically destroyed the great chain of being, which was God's natural order for the universe, or that's what the Jacobeans believed. So an extremely tragic character in that sense. Then we have Lady Macbeth, who is his wife, with a charming image there. And basically, she is an extremely powerful and manipulative character, and she challenges Jacobean gender roles because she was a very strong woman in a period where women were not normally that strong. Okay, they were normally domesticated and very much in the background. And she manipulates Macbeth to commit regicide or murder of the king, but she again later unravels with the guilt, just like her husband in some ways, and suffers a tragic fate as well. Then we have King Duncan. Okay, so he is effectively a kind and generous ruler who values loyalty and honour, and he trusts Macbeth deeply, which was a big mistake for him because he goes to visit Macbeth in his castle and he ends up getting murdered in his bed. It's pretty grim stuff. And his murder represents the betrayal of the divine order, the divine right of kings, and as we said, the great chain of being, which believed that the order was put in place by God. So when Macbeth murders King Duncan, he's murdering not just his monarch and his liege lord, but also going against God's plan, which was a big no-no in this period. Then we have the three witches. Okay, you can see them in the image there, looking all nefarious. So they are mysterious and manipulative characters. They speak in riddles often. Half the time their dialogue doesn't even make much sense, and prophecies and predictions. And they drive the plot forward by planting dangerous ideas in Macbeth's mind that get him thinking about committing regicide in the first place. Okay, then we have Malcolm. So Prince Malcolm is the son of King Duncan, and he's obviously the rightful heir. So he returns to the throne after Macbeth's death at the end of the play, and by returning to the throne, the natural order is restored and the great chain of being kind of comes back into the way that it should have been. And so he's a symbol of natural kind of restoration and dynastic succession. Then we have Banquo, good old Banquo. So he is a noble and loyal soldier, and he's what we would call a dramatic foil to Macbeth. He's kind of a nice natural contrast. So whereas Macbeth is extremely ambitious, Banquo is the voice of reason and going, I'm not sure you want to do this, and kind of trying to kind of be a bit of a brake on Macbeth's kind of random actions. He also receives the prophecy from the witches about being king, but he doesn't act immorally. Okay, and that's used to kind of juxtapose against Macbeth's kind of boundless ambition. Okay, then we have Macduff. So Macduff is a honourable and loyal kind of lord, loyal to Scotland. However, his family are, in the course of the play, they're murdered by Macbeth in an awful kind of assassination. And it drives Macduff crazy, obviously. and triggers his retribution. So they have a massive sword fight at the end, and Macduff slays Macbeth and puts his head on a spike to kind of symbolise Macbeth's evil. Okay, so that's kind of just a nice little rundown of the characters. But let's now look at the characters from a different angle. So as you can see here, we've put together a nice little table for us, and we're going to work through this together. Take each character one by one, and we're going to look at how the audience would respond at the time, the Jacobean audience in the 1600s. But audiences change and they interpret the characters in different ways. So then we're going to look at how a modern audience would respond to the character and see how it's changed. Now, this is important because when you write your essays, you actually want to differentiate between audiences. So you want to talk about the emotional effect on the Jacobean audience, but also maybe sometimes in your essays talk about the effect on a modern audience as well. And that will unlock the higher marks because it shows more sophisticated reading skills. Okay then, so let's do it. So let's have a look. Firstly, we can see we're going to take Macbeth. So how would a Jacobean audience have responded to Macbeth at the time? Well, it would have been pretty grim, actually. So they would have seen him really as a massive traitor who is disrupting the great chain of being by killing King Duncan, and he got his just desserts. He got punished very brutally for regicide. Obviously, he ends up dead. However, a modern audience, we've become maybe a little bit softer and a bit more humane in the modern era. So I think a modern audience would have viewed Macbeth more sympathetically, maybe as a tragic figure who was destroyed by his own ambition. So that's a much softer reading than the Jacobean kind of, blood and guts kind of reading that they would have brought to Macbeth. So the two audiences would have understood him in very, very different ways, I believe. Then let's look at Lady Macbeth. So a Jacobean reading first. They would have been shocked at Lady Macbeth because she's rejecting femininity. She's not being like a normal woman just standing in the background, and she was actually showing ambition, and that was a big no-no in this period. So they would have seen her as very largely unnatural or even demonic, kind of a real nasty character. However, coming over to the right then, you can see here a more modern audience would have admired Lady Macbeth for her feminine strength, because we've had kind of layers of feminism now in our society. But also a modern reader or modern audience would have pitied Lady Macbeth because she does go through a lot of mental trauma, especially at the end of the play, for the guilt of what she's done. So again, a softer reading from a modern audience. Then we've got King Duncan. So as we can see here then, so with Duncan, the Jacobean audience would have saw him as a bit of a kingly ideal. He was divinely appointed. They believed in the divine right of kings, so he should have been protected by God. And his murder was disturbing the great chain of being, so he shouldn't have been kind of taken out of his position. However, a modern audience would have respected him for his honour, most definitely. But I think we expect a little bit more from our political rulers now. So we would have been a bit more negative in a modern reading of King Duncan, maybe seeing him as overly passive and maybe not strong enough to really sit in the big chair, as it were. And I think he wasn't really politically minded, and he should have been, because then he would have picked out the threats that were to his throne. Then we have the three witches. Okay, so the Jacobean audience, I think you can probably tell here, the Jacobean audience would have seen them as agents of the devil, irredeemably evil. You could be burnt at the stake for being a witch in this period, so the Jacobeans would have been very harsh on the witches. However, a more modern audience would have saw the witches maybe as symbols of fate, or psychological representations of Macbeth's ambition as well, because we're very up after Sigmund Freud. We're very into our psychology now, and so modern readings do tend to look at the three witches as psychological representations of Macbeth's mental state, which I think is a very interesting interpretation to analyse in your essays. Then we have Prince Malcolm. So the Jacobeans would see him very much as the rightful heir of the throne, He should be taking over after King Duncan. So he is very much a symbol of order and restoration for the Jacobeans, the natural way of doing things. King Duncan naturally dies, and then Malcolm should take over and everything should carry on. However, a modern reader or modern audience will probably look at Malcolm and kind of say and praise his cautiousness. He's very astute, and Malcolm is actually politically aware because he does actually end up on the throne at the end. That's a testament to his political skill and nous, and I think a modern audience would focus on that. Then we have Banquo. Obviously Macbeth's friend. So the Jacobeans saw Banquo as noble and loyal, and actually an ancestor of King James I in real life, so they would have really loved that and kind of praised him for that as a symbol of virtue, a voice of reason and someone who was very virtuous. A modern audience, so where we like our characters with a bit more cut and thrust, they would have seen him as noble, but potentially lacking in drama or dynamism. Dare I say Banquo is a little bit boring? And for a modern audience who are probably weaned on Hollywood films and things like that, he doesn't really have the cut and thrust to hold a modern audience's attention, really. He's just there as a dramatic foil to Macbeth, and a modern audience would have picked up on that. And then lastly, we have Macduff. Okay, so the Jacobean audience would really kind of see him as a heroic figure, restoring order and delivering divine justice to the evildoer of Macbeth. However, a modern audience would probably praise or focus on Macduff as a moral contrast to Macbeth, because Macbeth is pretty evil and Macduff's quite a loyal soldier, and would probably focus on his integrity and his kind of personal qualities that he brings to the play. So you can see there, can't you, if we just zoom out for 2 seconds, you can see that in terms of the table there is very much a different view of how we can interpret these characters when we look at it through a modern lens or when we look at it through a Jacobean lens. And the lenses do force us to look at the characters in very different ways. That will be very, very good for you to pick up on in your essays and in the exam. Okay. Now then, let's round off by looking at a really nice character journey. Okay, so we've picked on Macbeth for obvious reasons. He's the star of the show for the most part. So let's have a look then. So what's he like at the start of the text? So firstly, in Act 1, Scene 3, very early on, Macbeth bumps into the 3 witches. So he hears the witch's prophecy that he's going to become king, and it sparks his ambition, his tragic flaw. So at the start of the play, he's characterised very much as an ambitious but easily influenced character. He's not very emotionally intelligent, and he can get manipulated. And a good quote that shows that, he talks to the 3 witches and he says, "Stay, you imperfect speakers, tell me more." Now, for a Jacobean audience, especially, that would be a big no-no, because witches were seen as agents of the devil. So if you're talking to witches, you're effectively talking to agents of the devil, and that would be a big, big no-no. Okay, so a big warning sign from a Jacobean interpretation at the start of the play. Then as the play kind of carries on, I think the turning point is here for me. So I always teach to my classes and my tutees, I say Act 2, Scene 2 is the real hinge point in the play. So let's think about this just for a second. So first off then, in Act 2, Scene 2, Macbeth kills King Duncan and fulfills the prophecy through treachery and violence. He murders him in his bed. It's pretty grim stuff. So it reveals Macbeth's capacity for brutality, but also he's in a conflict because he didn't really want to commit this murder. He was kind of pushed into it. And a brilliant quote here. He says, when he's looking at all the blood on his hands after murdering the king, "Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand?" Beautifully constructed rhetorical question there. And Neptune, obviously the god of the ocean, and it shows that, this blood will never leave your hand. You are stained forever. And I think that's the big ethical turning point for Macbeth in this whole play. Okay, and a great quote for your essays as well. And then as the play moves towards its conclusion, its very tragic conclusion, how does Macbeth kind of end up? What's he like at the end of the play? Well, he gives up morally by Act 5, Scene 1. So Macbeth reflects bleakly on life after hearing of Lady Macbeth's tragic death. And the characterisation here is he's portrayed as weary, nihilistic is a beautiful word for your essays, meaning kind of that he doesn't care about anything anymore and nothing has any meaning for him. So very nihilistic and emotionally empty. He's a shell of a man, an extremely tragic figure by the end of the play. And he has this great soliloquy, this great speech, and he says, as a phrase, something he says, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. So time is just becoming meaningless now. Every day is blurring into one. It doesn't matter about being king. We've lost everything and we've lost our morality. So he really goes on a massive emotional arc throughout the play, and it's very good to trace that, especially if Macbeth comes up in your exams. Okay then, so let's just have a very quick kind of rundown. So we've looked at a quick who's who, just to give you an overview of all the characters. Then really importantly, we've teased apart the differences between a Jacobean audience and a modern audience and how they interpret the characters. And then we've given you a really nice character arc for Macbeth and how he changes and evolves throughout the play, which is a really, really important thing in terms of Shakespeare's tragedy here. So just want to say, obviously, if you've enjoyed this lesson or if it's been useful for you, as always, please don't forget to hit the like, subscribe and tap the bell icon. It really helps the channel to grow. Keep looking, obviously, on the Milton Rose Learning YouTube channel, because we'll be dropping videos every week. And it just remains to say, really, thanks for watching and take care.